back. This is BoomerLife on Aug14th2017.
This is BoomerLife on Aug14th2017. I'm Joanne Sutton, and we're talking about Alzheimer's disease and other dementias today with our friends and experts from the Alzheimer's Society of British Columbia. CEO Maria Howard is here, and our topic today is going to focus on driving and dementia, and to continue the discussion of the impact of the Alzheimer's Society of BC's work right across the province with a focus on driving assessments. Our next guest is Lisa Jameson. Now, Lisa is the principal of Old Dale Elementary School in Surrey. She lives in Ladner with her family, and she was a caregiver for her father, Tom, who lived with a diagnosis of mixed dementia, and we'll find out more about that. So, Lisa, we really appreciate you joining our show today.
Oh, it's a real pleasure to be here.
So,
thanks.
Being able to talk to people like yourself who have actually lived through the dementia journey is incredibly illuminating, and it can actually really help our listeners as well, many of whom are on that journey themselves. Remember that none of us should have to face the dementia journey alone. So I understand that your dad, Tom, he was diagnosed with dementia back in 2010. Can you take us back to that time and tell us a little bit about what prompted your family to actually seek out the diagnosis and maybe what happened from there?
Yes, for sure. Well, actually, my dad was going through a series of different types of situations where he wasn't quite himself. To some degree, I feel that he was almost fearful of what was going on. He had little episodes of memory lapses, and that sort of bothered him because he really prided himself into talking with people and being quite a communicator. He was going out with my mom and not able to find common places. I remember my mom telling me a story of where, he was just going to a friend's of his in Richmond, and he'd been there so many times and they couldn't find it. And so that really bothered him. He was also turning into a bit of a night owl where he was up for large portions of the evening and didn't quite understand why he was unable to sleep. Things like that were happening. A huge turning point, though, was when they were on a trip down to the United States to go to Tacoma, just to go shopping and stuff, which they like to do. And my dad got lost, and, common one road, basically a one road place. So my dad got lost, and it really sort of scared him to the point where he actually had to have a police officer that was going by help navigate him back, just a couple of simple turns. So that was a real turning point for him. I know when they got back from the trip, he talked to me a lot about that and my mom and my family, and it really sort of bothered him. He thought really deep down there was something that wasn't quite right. So he did go in to see the family doctor, and who sent us off to do a series of tests, mostly memory tests and things like that. And he was given the diagnosis of Alzheimer's. And then later, we went out to a specialist out at UBC where he also had some MRIs and different things done there, where they determined that he also had a diagnosis of vascular dementia as well, they thought. So he kind of got a big walk of a whole bunch of stuff there.
Double whammy.
Double whammy, for sure.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about your dad. Was he a professional? And how old was he when he got the diagnosis?
My dad was 77. And yes, he was a professional. Actually, sorry, my dad was 76. Okay. He was a professional. He was a school principal and prided himself in doing a really great job there. And as a family, we were always very proud of him. He seemed to always be ahead of himself. And he did a lot for a ton of people. Like, he would be the one that was helping the seniors up the road and taking them things, helping them drive them different places. So he sort of prided himself in his mind, so to speak, and being able to help others. So
I'm sure that was very daunting for him. Probably suffered a little like fear and anxiety when things weren't going right.
Precisely,
okay.
Right? Because he really prided himself there, that's for sure.
Okay, so now today's show, our very specific conversation is about driving and dementia. So I understand that quite soon after your dad's diagnosis, he gave up his license willingly. What can you tell us about that? How did that work?
It was a process, for sure. And I think that part of the process was my dad being a school principal and having a very large connection to family. He has 14 grandchildren. And with all these different situations going on, he started to really impact him emotionally to what was going on within his life. He did have some times where he went and he got a new car, thinking that the new car was maybe help him a little bit with his driving, and he ended up purchasing another van. Then he decided that about a month or a month and a half after having this van, he returned the van, traded it in, lost all that money, which was important at the time, right? And purchased VR's Honda CRV. Sorry. And thinking that a smaller car would be better for him. And that didn't help. He was still going out where he was getting a lot of honking, going into the passenger side, moving over and swerving over there, a lot of scares. Didn't have any accidents per se, but enough that it rattled him. And it also rattled my mom to the point where they were talking about it quite a lot. And being the retired school principal and the grandpa, he always talked about, well, what happens if, Tavis is out on the road, or Heather or Megan? Like, what about these kids if they're out on the road? I don't want to hurt them. So this sort of coincided with him having some cataract surgery, which I think in some ways helped the process for him because it took him off the road a little bit and allowed him to have a little bit of more of a thought process. The surgery went pretty well, but he always had this driving part weighing heavily, and it was mainly surrounded the children that could possibly be out on that road. So unbeknown to me, one morning I woke up and he'd give me a call. He said, I'm going to give up my license. This is it. I got to worry about the kids on the road. And he asked me to take him in. So it was just all of a sudden.
And that was it. So it was a series of events.
It was quite a series of events because, he had all these little episodes, but different things I think had to be in place for it to be a well-rounded decision.
So I'm just wondering, did you reach out to the Alzheimer's Society at any point during this time, like to seek their consultation or their help or take advantage of some of the programs that they had to offer? Yes, actually.
One of the things when my dad did get the diagnosis, I was the kind of person that I needed to know everything because I wanted to... It was quite a devastating diagnosis for my dad, my mom, the rest of my siblings. And we all sort of took it in different ways. My sister and I tended to be ones that really needed to have a lot of information. So the first thing we did go out with First Link and connected with them as well, found out what was out there. We did do a series of courses where we took my mom to some courses and things like that. And my dad was part of the Minds in Motion program. And that is where it's a fabulous, fabulous program. I can't say enough about that. But that's where he also was able to open up a little bit about the driving situation. But also my daughter Heather was she was always taking to that. So she was able to have those conversations with them as well as to support people at Minds in Motions about the driving. So I think that really supported the decision. I don't think they were ever in a position where they said, Tom, you have to give up your license. None of that ever occurred. It was more asking questions and being supportive, helping my daughter, his granddaughter, through the process and talking with him about it. So yes, the Alzheimer's Society was a huge, huge part for us.
So how did it affect his immediate life, giving up that driver's license? He did it willingly, but obviously it would have affected his day-to-day habits and behavior, your mom's needs. Did she drive?
Well, surprisingly, my mom didn't drive by choice. So my dad was pretty much her chauffeur for life, and that's the way their relationship was. Once my dad gave up his license, it was almost like a weight had been released, and he was a lot happier. And I think he always would go back to it's the roads are safe and things like that. My mom, she knew that we were behind her. My dad knew. He always used to talk about me having his back. So he knew that we were around. He did know that I had 2 children at the time that were driving, plus my husband. So he knew he had the support. And that's sort of an area that I worry for others' families because, what do you do if you don't have that support with people around that can drive? Because that is a huge thing. We were able to. My dad planned his excursions so that if there were errands, they were all done on one trip. My mom knew the same thing. My dad joked about getting a scooter. He thought he would be a stylish guy in the neighborhood, things like that. But we looked into things like the Handy Dart. We had that up and running for times when we couldn't support him or my siblings couldn't support him. All those sort of things, taking the bus. And I think the bus was a hard transition for my dad, though, just not having done that before.
He probably never rode it in his life.
No, and, he tells me one story which sort of broke my heart where he actually forgot, with the Alzheimer's, I don't know if it was that was playing in, but he didn't get off at the right stop. But the bus driver was amazing, and he took him, and they went all the way through, and he stopped to let him go to the washroom, and eventually got him back to where he was supposed to be.
See, now that's a dementia-friendly community.
Right? So that was, I mean, to me, that broke my heart, right? And that's why I put different things into place, like a cell phone. I got my dad a cell phone to make sure that I knew, he had that and knew how it worked.
You could track him, yeah.
And, you flip it up and all the buttons that it was all coded that he knew which button to push and things like that, and pictures and stuff on the phone. So that was really important. So just having those things in place. But I think that if you don't sort of think ahead to get those in place, it can be a more difficult situation.
Mm-hmm. It really is a journey, and it's a very tough thing to do. I imagine it was tough for him, but he sounds like a very smart, logical man. But many consider losing their driver's license a complete loss of their independence. So if you were speaking with a family who might be facing that question right now of someone having to give up their driver's license within that family, someone who's been diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's, what would you say to them?
Well, first of all, I would say to them that if they are considering it, then it probably is time. As much as it's a very hard decision, if it's going around in their mind right now, then they obviously have concerns.
So they probably know the answer already.
They probably already know the answer. That's right. I think that safety is a huge conversation that they need to have, the safety for their loved one, but also for the safety around. And I think that there's lots of things that you can put in place so that the feeling of a loss of independence doesn't have to be so great. I mean, with Maria's story about the truck, that was, amazing. And it brought up a reminder of, with my dad having gone, he finally ended up with this Honda CR-V, and he brought it over to our house and for the kids to drive. But every time we took my dad out, we took him out in his car. And
so he still owned the vehicle.
He still owned the vehicle.
It still helped shape his identity.
And in some ways, he thought he was really helping the kids to give them another vehicle to ride. But I do, going back to families that are going through these decisions, even though you may think that you know the answer now, but to reach out and find out things. Talk to the Alzheimer's Society. Phone ICBC. Find out what the process is, because when I took my dad in, I didn't do that. And in hindsight, I wish I had, because as I was driving my dad over, I was far more anxious than he was, but it's because of my unknown. They were fabulous when we were there. It was an amazing experience, if you can call it that, as your dad's giving up his license.
It's all relative,
but if you know what's going to happen, then you're better equipped and better prepared. Look into your community. The Alzheimer's is great, but there's also, your community centers, some of the health organizations. They do have little shuttle buses and all sorts of things that are out there that if you don't phone and know that, I really wish people could go out there and just find out all that information.
Mm-hmm. Some great advice there. So as we just wrap up the story about your dad and your journey of Alzheimer's disease and being a caregiver for him, I know it's only been a couple of years since he's passed. So is there anything else that you wanted to share with us about that journey or about your dad?
One of the biggest things, I think, in hindsight, is to always talk with your family. My dad was a very proud man, and he really wanted a lot of the information kept, and I had a lot of it not just on my own, and he didn't even want it shared with some of his children. But I think that in hindsight, that's a mistake, that everybody should be involved in the process. Everyone should be able to talk, because it is a journey for everyone, and it's the discussion and the conversation that's most important in making your loved one feel safe and secure.
You've been listening to Lisa Jamieson here on BoomerLife on CL 650. Lisa, I want to say thank you so much for being here, sharing your story. The examples that you've provided with us today have helped answer many questions for a number of others that are in this predicament. So thanks.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks.
This is BoomerLife. I'm Joanne Sutton in the studio with Maria Howard, CEO of the Alzheimer's Society BC. And the conversation continues with some research on driving assessments. That's next on CL 650.
Canada's only weekly radio show dedicated to the baby boomer lifestyle. This is Boomer Life on CL 650.